Released in 1989, the Game Boy is only 3 years younger than our favorite genre. And despite having been alive during the golden age of beat 'em ups, Nintendo's first portable didn't receive too many games in that genre, amounting to just 12 games. And being absolutely honest about them, there is little to enjoy here. Hello and welcome my friends to The Flying Kick, I am Savino, and today we will check if there are any beat 'em ups for the Game Boy worth getting for your collection. The first beat 'em up to be released for the little console couldn't be anything but Double Dragon. Released in August 1990, Double Dragon, like the Game Boy, doesn't need any introduction, and you probably played this one already, so let's be brief. This is honestly one of the few good beat 'em ups on the console, so yeah, don't get your hopes up with this list. As expected, you can play the story mode in single player, and like the NES version, it has a 2-player versus mode that I have never played in my life. If it is anything like the one on the NES, then it's nothing I will miss one day. But that's where most of the similarities with the NES versions end. Double Dragon on the Game Boy is more straightforward, removing all RPG features that, for some, slowed the NES version down. I honestly like this feature, but that's for another video. While it's nothing special, Double Dragon is pretty entertaining. The game can be challenging, especially because your attacks can only hit one enemy at a time, which leads to some unwarranted situations. I would say that you need some crowd control to avoid situations like this, but here you just need a dual control. Aside from my bad jokes and from only being capable of hitting one enemy per strike, you also need to beat every level with only one life. Yeah, you have more lives than that, you start the game with 2 and earn an extra 1 by accumulating points, but if you die, you will return to the beginning of the level. Honestly, the only reason for that, at least in my opinion, is to increase the game's length, because with only 4 levels and a handful of enemies per level, you can easily beat this one in 20 minutes or less. I said 4 levels, but it feels more like 5, since the last one is pretty long and even has a transition. Overall, this is a pretty good game, the graphics are great, the soundtrack is awesome, especially if you enjoy the Game Boy sound, and the combat, despite being primitive for today's standards, is still entertaining after all these years. Only 5 months after getting the first Double Dragon, the Game Boy received the second game in the series. This would be unimaginable nowadays. Double Dragon 2 on the Game Boy is pretty unique, being its own game, not following the arcade or NES version. The story is also unique and tells how Billy and Jimmy were framed for murder by a man called Anderson after joining a group of fighters called Scorpions. Now they have to prove their innocence by beating the living hell out of everyone. You know, like any normal person would do. To add to the realistic story, the graphics here are very good, even for today I think. The backgrounds are diverse and have a lot of details to make the city more believable for a portable game from 1990. This was amazing, and the gameplay is pretty good. The game, like every other game in this list, only puts 2 enemies on the screen with you, but here the enemies are more varied. And the combat is a bit more fun than in the first game, offering more variety and some pretty nice moves that you can mix to create different sequences. The controls are perfectly tuned for the game, and there's no platforming shenanigans, which was a bit excessive in the first game. But if you are a Double Dragon fan, you will notice there is something amiss here. While the combat feels great, some moves don't really feel like Double Dragon, like this Dragon Punch when you press both buttons, or this throw instead of the traditional one. And there's a reason for that. In reality, this is a River City game with a Double Dragon skin. Check this out. It is possible that Technos did that to make the game easier to sell here in the West, and according to the release date of both, they were made together, each one for a different market. Yeah, the early 90s were a crazy time, but no matter which version you want to play, you are in for a great time. As I said, the game is pretty fun and is way bigger than the first one. The best part is that if you die, you respawn where you died. The enemies are easy to trick and beating the bosses is not a problem at all once you figure out how to stun lock them. But overall, this is another game for the little console that is worth getting for your collection. My only criticism here is about the main theme, which is the worst version I have ever heard. So let's leave Double Dragon behind because the third game is terrible. And let's talk about Battletoads. Did you know the Game Boy was the console with the most versions of Battletoads? It had 3: Battletoads, Battletoads and Ragnarok's World, and Battletoads and Double Dragon. Look, it's not my fault if Double Dragon is like 1/3 of the whole Game Boy's beaten up library. The first one to be released, Battletoads, it's not the same game as the NES. This one has more beaten up stage than any other game in the series aside from the 2020s game and the arcade one. But sure, being a Battletoads game, you can expect some different gameplay styles from time to time. This one honestly is pretty bad. The combat feels unresponsive, the enemies are not interesting to fight, so get away from this one. The second, Battletoads in Ragnarok's World, is the same as the NES. I mean, I don't consider this game to be a beaten up, it's more a mix of genders blended together, but the parts where you fight are pretty fun. And finally, Battletoads Double Dragon, which are the inferior version when compared to every other one available. But still, if you enjoyed the games on the NES, SNES or Mega Drive, you will probably enjoy this one. I was never a huge fan of Battletoads, but I know there are a lot of fans of the Toads around, so if you're looking for one game for your collection, the one with the Lee brothers is the way to go. Yeah, I'm a Double Dragon fanboy, what can I do? Now, this one was released for the Game Boy Color and I was really surprised by it. The first beaten up from Way Forward, as far as I know, WWF Betrayal, is a pretty fun game. It's not great by any means, but it's really enjoyable in its simplicity. You play as one of these 4 wrestlers, and depending on who you pick, someone different will be the villain. The story is about the kidnapping of some guy's daughter, not sure if someone's famous, and you have to rescue her. Basic stuff. Here you have a punch, a kick, and you can run and unleash this little attack that doesn't do much. You can't jump, by the way. You also have a finisher, which is unique to each character, but for that you need to fill this bar here, which you do very often. The combat feels a bit loose and lacks the crunchiness that you get in the Double Dragon games, but even so, it's fun to simply body slam your enemies from time to time. The game can be pretty unfair at times, with enemies stun locking you without much you can do to avoid it, and the bosses can be pretty cheap with attacks that will overcome yours with ease. As I said, it's not a fantastic game, but it can be pretty fun to play 1 or 2 times with your favorite wrestlers. The graphics are good and it has some pretty fluid animations for the consoles, not to mention how colorful everything looks here. I mean, after playing a lot of games in black and white, seeing that many colors was a nice surprise. Again, not a fantastic game, but compared to what else was available, this one is pretty good. You only have one more game that was officially released here in the West, Darkman. And the less we talk about this one, the better, because this game is pretty bad. Just take a look at this. Yeah, we will talk about this one someday in the future. There is another Kunio-ku game that was never ported to the West and I have absolutely no idea what to do. I walked around the map for some good 15 minutes and nothing happened, so I quit the game. I didn't find the translation online, so this one will be left for another day. Finally, the last beat 'em up released for the Game Boy was Final Fantasy X Fantasy War, a Chinese bootleg game that was released at some point around 2001. This game is, as you may imagine, as bad as it looks, and this is another one that I will save for a bootleg games episode. And that's it for the video, guys. Unfortunately, the 8-bit generation wasn't the best one when it comes to beat 'em ups, but there are at least some fun games for us to play around when going to the mall in the back seat of our dad's car. I'll be back next week with a pretty big video talking about Dragon's Crown, but until then, I hope you all have an awesome week, and remember, keep beating up.